So first of all, thanks for doing this for me. Zevi,
Oh,
should I call you Rabbi Zevi? Are you
no,
a
no,
rabbi?
no.
Uh,
Just Zevi is more than enough.
okay, cool, man. So yeah, I really like the message of your videos and your whole platform, and I think we have like some kind of similarity in what we're trying to do, and that similarity is just unity and unification of. Well, I'll back it up a little bit. I see, as you see, there is some kind of similarity between all of the religions in the world and all of the belief systems, and they all point a certain way and they're pointing toward the way of unification. And you have a way of explaining it. I think it goes, every religion has mysticism in it, and in that mysticism there is unity. Correct?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, you are the one that said it. That, which is, I think that's beautiful because it's true. I mean, I'm pretty sure you're way more a religious scholar than I am. But from all of the Wikipedia pages that I've read, I've seen that like there, it is just all of these belief systems are just pointing us in the direction and to tell us just in a various different languages and different practices. They're just telling us that, look, you're all one thing. Like human beings are just be a little less selfish, be a little more selfless, respect one another, and you're just, it's all about love essentially. And it seems to get lost in translation over the years of this. So there's some people that say this is how it should be, and there's some people that say this is how it should be, and then we get into wars over books, and it's people just lost the meaning of what these religious texts mean. So that's why I wanted to bring you on here, and hopefully you can put a little more eloquently than I could, because I did notice that you are also a very, very eloquent man. You seem to be very studious. So yeah, man, if you want to start this thing off before I go off on a rant, a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you came to create the Seekers of Unity YouTube channel.
Sure. Where should we begin? I am Australian. I was born in Sydney, Australia, to a Orthodox Jewish family, a Hasidic family, and from a very young age, I was learning Chassidut, which is Jewish mysticism. Today, it's a brainchild kind of Kabbalah, which is the more popular, better known form of Jewish mysticism. And I was learning it for a long time, and to be honest, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. It was like very esoteric and very abstract and very celestial. And I didn't see how it spoke to me in my life. I mean, at the time I was 13, 14, 15, 16. I was a young teenager. That's when we began learning. And just by like random, I mean, nothing's by chance, but what we would call chance, I discovered through a novel I was reading. I do love reading books. Have always been part of my identity. That there was this idea of mysticism in other traditions, and I like at the time I didn't even understand that what I was studying was Jewish mysticism. That's like a sort of an English or Christian scholarly term, which I came later to understand was a term which is what I was Chassidut, what I was studying was. But then discovering that there was mysticism in other traditions, and then beginning to explore the similarities and the drives that they all push in the same direction, and the motivation and the reasoning behind them, and then the beautiful differences between them. It really kind of lit my heart on fire. And ever since then, I've really been studying my own mysticism, Jewish mysticism, and mysticism of other traditions, which is just so beautiful. And I think, as you said, it's true that these religions, these great religions, do share this core truth, and sometimes it gets lost, unfortunately. And I think that they share that core truth because there's something about the human experience to which unity rings true. And I'm sure we'll get into that as the discussion goes on. And that's really just been what I've been chasing. And for a long time, I had this romantic idea of like going and living by some like river in the woods and writing a book and trying to like get these ideas out on the table. And then slowly I began to like learn. The process of learning is learning how little you know, really, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to realize how little I know and how many people have come before me and already explored these ideas and beginning to explore them, which was just an incredible experience too. And a friend of mine was like, hey, Zevi, instead of trying to like write a book, which is going to take you like a decade, why don't you just start putting out like short videos on YouTube? Like I started with like a book review, and then slowly people caught on, like, hey, this is really great. We'd love to get involved. And the truth is there's like so much information out there already, but what I've been finding is that we were able to create not just more information and more content, which there's so much of, thank God, but real conversation and community of people who are like-minded, people who are seeking together. And that's really been the real gift of this journey. I think I don't want to. If I continue this, I'm going to start ranting on and getting all
yeah,
teary.
We gotta check ourselves on the rants, I guess. Good. Yeah, that's beautiful, man. I think that is an awesome, like that's what the world needs. I think that mission is so close to just like that. What higher purpose is there than uniting all belief systems that tear us apart? You know, that is. I love it, man. I think that's awesome. So would you say mysticism is like meaning behind the face value of the words in all of this literature? It's like there's the face value of like all the stories in the allegories, but then there's something behind that means more. Is that how you classify mysticism as?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on which context you're using the word in, but if you're using mysticism in a religious context, you're absolutely correct. And to get a bit technical here and academic, the term mysticism, which originates in Christian thought, coming from the Greek mystikoi, which means to close one's eyes or mouth, came to prominence in Greek theology to really mean a type of interpretation of the Bible. So mysticism was really first used as mystical theology. And what it meant was that there was the face value of the scripture, of the verse in the Bible, be it, the Hebrew Bible or the Christian Bible, and the mystical reading was to read beyond that. And that really begins with people like Philo of Alexandria, who begin to read the text allegorically and saying, when we say Abraham, we're talking about the soul. When we say Sarah, we're talking about the body. When we're talking about Egypt, we're talking about a state of consciousness, all of these different readings. So mystical theology, where the term mysticism later derives from, is actually about looking beyond the words of the revealed word, the words of revelation, to see what there really is behind them. And in some sense, there's a very nice synergy there with a more broad definition of mysticism, which is, to use now a bit of an Eastern metaphor, there's the story of the fellow who points at the moon. He says, look, there is the moon. And all the students who aren't so sure, they look at his finger and they think that the finger is the moon. And the moral of the story is, don't confuse the finger pointing to the moon for the moon itself. So the words of religion, you could say, are like the finger pointing to the reality, which is the unity, which is love, which is God, which is consciousness, which is bliss, however we're going to call it. And mysticism is about seeing beyond, not getting stuck with those words and seeing beyond them to the reality that lies behind them. So I think that that definition works well, both in a technical sense and in a common sense.
Why do you think the authors decided to write in that way that was sort of symbolic? Because do you believe that these were actual stories as well? Like is there some truth to the actual, like, the biblical stories, or are these not meant to be taken at face value at all? Is there actually the opposite, and it's just actually all just symbols?
So that's a great question. It's a very long debated question, both in Jewish theology and in other traditions that are dealing with these same stories. And there's generally a spectrum of ways that question is answered. But the answer which most appeals to myself is one that finds a place for both of them, where there's a phrase in Talmudic Judaism where we say, Ein mikra yotze mibdei pshuta, that the verse itself can never leave its simple, like, plain meaning, that the plain meaning always remains, that even when we find allegorical truths behind it, we don't negate the story itself. That's one side of it. So the other side of it is that when we talk about truth, we think about truth as something which is reference to something that happened literally in the external world. So a historical truth is something we can talk about as truth. But I think that historical truth is circumstantial truth, right? So the fact that, let's say, I woke up this morning at 6:30 in the morning, right? That's true. It's circumstantially true. It's not necessarily true. There was no inherent reason why, by definition, I needed to wake up at 6. It was a contingent truth. It was truth because it happened as such. But then there are truths that are truths because they're fundamentally true, not because they happen to have happened, but because they are is why they unfolded in reality. And those truths are spiritual truths, are mythological truths, are poetic truths, are I would say also moral and ethical truths. And when I'm looking to a biblical text for truth, the historical truth is not so important. That's really a contingency. And I think people get stuck on that point. People are like, did this really happen? Did it not really happen? And the question is not did that happen, but is it happening? So when we talk about Mount Sinai, for example, or any of the miracles, the exodus from Egypt, all the great miracles in the biblical story from the perspective of Jewish mysticism, the question is not what did those things happen? The question is, are they happening for us now? Where do we see our own seas splitting? Where do we see our own exoduses from Egypt? Where would we see our own revelations at Sinai? So the question is sort of atemporalized. It's taken out of history and brought into the present. But in the end of the day, part of the without getting too lost here, part of the beauty I think of mysticism, in the fact that it has a power to unite, it also unites those two truths. It finds a way to hold on to what we could call the simple historical truth with the deeper spiritual truth, and to not have them at odds with one another, but to find a way to synthesize them, where they can both be pertinent and both be meaningful.
Yeah, that's how I see it as well. Why do you think it got lost over the years? Because I feel like the majority of people that have a tradition, like they have these religious traditions that have been passed on in their family for generations. It seems like people only get stuck on the stories in the actual historical representation. They don't really know what these were. Because, all right, so first of all, my background is my parents didn't raise me to be any sort of tradition at all. I was free to believe whatever I wanted to believe. So I am studious somewhat more than most people in looking at all the different philosophies of the world. And it brought me to, like, there is some kind of universal truth through all of these stories. And I think it was actually a blessing where my parents didn't raise me that way, because I might have got sucked into the story. And it's, it's not anybody's fault. It's just how it was. It's just through the tradition. So why do you think that through the traditions, it seems like people they lose the actual true meaning of where these came from and what these mean for us as human beings?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a very real question, and a hard question, and there's probably more than one answer, and perhaps you can think together, think in conversation.
Yeah.
The first two thoughts that pop into my head is, one is that the truths that are being contained within the narratives, within the stories. There's a great line from I think he's a French theorist of mythology. He says that a myth is not a story which is untrue. It's a truth told in the form of a story. So these biblical myths, let's say these truths told the stories, sometimes the truth which they're trying to convey is fundamentally and inherently inexpressible. It's ineffable, which is very, very typical of mysticism, right? Even in contemporary forms of mysticism, people that have, a tripped down mystical experience, they've come down from doing a heroic dose of whatever it is, and you ask them to tell me what happened, tell me what you experienced. The first thing is, wow, there are no words. I just can't say. Language is inadequate to describe what just happened. Ineffability, which according to scholars of mysticism is one of the key characteristics of mystical experiences. So because what they're trying to express is fundamentally inexpressible, and therefore the need to clothe it in these narratives can create a situation where what had to have been expressed that couldn't have been expressed ends up not being seen and expressed. And that's part of perhaps the challenge that let's say the biblical or religious authors in all traditions have. Another one perhaps is that there's something to look at this from a bit more of a larger cosmic scale. There's something in reality which seems to be like a fundamental law or habit of reality, where there's a flow, there's a pulse to life. Life is not static and stagnant. Things move, right? The tide comes in and out, the heart pumps
Tao.
blood back and forth. The Tao, yeah. There's a certain in Kabbalah we call Ratsui Vishuv. There's like this pulse back and forth. There's the negative and the positive. There's masculine and feminine, and that paradigm runs through all of reality. And there's a fundamental like dance of reality. You know, Shakti and Shiva. Every tradition has some way of referring to it, and we see it. Nature is full of this, and I think that religion, which is not other than nature, which is not other than the cosmos as well, also has its own flow, its own, you know, ebb and flow, its own hills and valleys. And that could just be part of the fundamental structure of everything else that has flow and pulse to it. And you see that in the case of religion, where you have these pulsations, these waves between, you know, an inspired prophet, a mystic, an enlightened being who comes and tries passing with his truth. And then inevitably it's going to get, you know, stultified and trapped in tradition and in institutions and in ritual that's lost the meaning. And then that necessitates someone else to stand up to the plate and for her to bring that back to the people and to bring the fire back and the energy back. And there's something, if it was only smooth sailing the whole way around, then there'd be something lost about it. The fact that religion has kind of this inbuilt mechanism where it needs to be revived every few, you know, decades, 100 years, perhaps is part of the beauty of the system.
Yeah, that is true, man. It seems like we need to lose our way in order to find it. Like if we were always found all the time, then we wouldn't really know. How do I phrase this? If we always, I guess unity wouldn't be so special if we didn't feel any disconnect. Like if we were always unified and that's how we felt all the time, yeah, it would seem like we're just not on that flow. It's like a balancing act in a way, that yin and the yang.
For sure, yeah. I mean, it's. I think this is like a basic idea that runs through a lot of philosophy of language. And Alan Watts was like always would talk about this idea how like if there was no summer, there would be no such thing as winter. If there was no night, there would be no such thing as day. Like we need the polarity and the antinomy to create any meaning at all. That's my like generous reading of what's happening in religious history, without me like coming up and being like, how these people keep messing it up and they keep like misunderstanding. That's like my generous to be like, no, it's just the universe doing its thing.
Yeah, I mean, even though those people are messing it up, it is still just the universe doing its thing, essentially.
Yeah, there's nothing other than the universe doing its thing, right?
Yes, the whole truth is just we're all just the universe doing its thing.
For sure.
Do you think so? Because of that, you don't see a world that's completely unified? Like, do you think that's too ideal?
So I'm very much about unity. Like my whole project is Seekers of Unity, but if I had like more space to add more to the title, I don't think unity itself cuts it. I think there's like a better expression, which is unity in diversity. And there's an old idea that runs through a lot of ancient myths. I'll just give you the Kabbalistic version because it's what I know best. But the idea is that before this entity, you know, the unified all that we call God in the West creates the world, God is already unified. And God is already sort of perfect in God's being and doesn't need anything to be more like perfect than it already is. And then the Kabbalists ask a question, so then why did God create the world? And the answer is because there was something lacking in God's perfection, in God's perfect unity. There was something which was not there, which is kind of a paradox because the perfect has to include all. The only thing that the perfect can be missing is imperfection. And the Kabbalists say that God actually wanted some semblance of imperfection to perfect God's imperfection. And I think that's the space of diversity inside unity and unity in diversity, where the two of them go back into that dance, which is really like that yin yang that completes them. It's not, if the whole circle was white, it wouldn't be complete. It's because you have the black and the white and the white and the black and the black and the white for all eternity, that there's something that necessitates that. And I think that just a stable, and I think this idea can be applied like in psychology, in politics, in economics, a stable field, right, does not hold its own stability. In physics, in sociology, and like nothing stable maintains itself because it has to collapse at some point. It has to, the second that unity introspects upon itself, when the one sees itself, it's already no longer just one, it's already one plus the self-observation. So unity fundamentally collapses to make way for diversity, to make way for unity, to make way for diversity. So and I think as well, I mean, this has implications perhaps for like utopianistic political thinking. Is it possible to have a real messianic utopian age without it inviting, some sort of fall back into itself so that it can continue to grow? Which is one of the great conundrums. You see this in a lot of the cosmologies where the cycle just goes on, and the sort of the epochs, the eras, they don't reach an end. They keep recycling and keep spiraling.
Yeah, that's what Eastern traditions say, is that we're just in this giant cycle. Like this universe is just this giant cycle that's just coming into being, and it just never really ends. And
yeah,
and the only conclusion you can come to is you just ride the line between the yin and yang. You ride the line between, it is the Tao, it is the way. Like you ride that line between the good and the bad and the waves and the ups and the downs. So it's interesting that you mentioned the Kabbalah and how they have that belief, because that's very similar to like Brahman and Atman and Hindu beliefs, with pretty much the entire universe is Brahman, but he got a little bored, so he decided to create out of his boredom us in the material world, and through that we each have Atman inside of all of us, our own soul, I guess you could say. And it is God. Like all of our Atmans add up to Brahman. And that's pretty much what you just said from the Kabbalah. It's just that, there is no unity. There is not just, without Brahman, there cannot be Atman, and without Atman, there cannot be Brahman. And you can't just have one aspect of the yin and the yang. You can't just have yin and you can't just have yang. So as a human being, it seems like once you realize the fundamental polarities, you have to ride that line, right? Which comes from Eastern traditions. So my question to you is, does Judaism have any, I don't really know too much about Judaism. Does it have any like belief system in the Tao, in like that the wave, the flow, like going with that flow? Is there anything in that, in the like the Kabbalah, or yeah,
for sure. Yeah. No, I think you said it very well. And the Kabbalists have the same idea in almost identical language, where they have God as infinite. And the term typically uses the Ein Sof, literally the one without end, which I think would be the closest equivalent to what the East called Brahman. And then within the human, you have a manifestation of that. And it has 5 different terms, depending on which level of kind of soul it's referring to. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. But they're all seen as fundamentally one with Brahman, one with the Ein Sof, with the infinite. And because true infinity, everything has to be one with infinity, or else it's not true infinity. Right? True infinity includes everything.
Yeah. And
the idea that there's some sort of boredom that sets in, that leads way, I think is sort of a human or an anthropomorphic way of talking about this fundamental instability of unity, which leads way for duality back to unity. And the cycles do come into existence. The Kabbalists, for example, speak about in the biblical, when we talk about agricultural and the laws in the Bible, there's what we call there's the weeks, there's the Shmitot, the 7 years, and the 50 years, the Yovel. And the Kabbalists see these as references to the cosmic cycles of the of 7 millennia and then 50 millennia, and how like things keep repeating back on themselves. But one second, you asked a specific question and I'm getting distracted. What was your specific question?
It was, in Judaism, is there
about the way
of the
right.
way, the Tao, the flow.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me. So yes. So there is. So this is where Jewish mysticism actually does something very unique. And by unique, I don't mean better. I just mean I mean unique, and I think uniqueness is important. And I think it's important to see the unity and the duality within the unity, the multiplicity, the diversity within the unity. What Jewish mysticism does, and it does with quite a strong degree of genius, is that it does not divorce itself from Jewish ritualism, or from what's known quite sometimes disparagingly as Jewish legalism. So just to give a basic introduction, a sort of a Judaism 101, Judaism has the corpus of Judaism, what would be in the Eastern traditions, the Dharma, is called the Torah in Judaism, which is the collective wisdom, the scriptures, and through the ages of Judaism. And it's divided in different ways. For example, there is the written Torah, which is the Bible, that's the Tanakh. And then there's the oral or the verbal tradition, which includes the Mishnah and the Talmud and other works like that. Another way which the division is done is between the revealed aspects of Torah and the exoteric, what's taught to the public, and there's the esoteric, the hidden parts, which includes things like Kabbalah and Chassidut in earlier forms, like the Maaseh Bereshit, Maaseh Merkava, and different forms of the esoteric side of Judaism. But what's fascinating and perhaps to some degree unique in Judaism is that throughout Jewish history, the masters of the hidden wisdom in Judaism were always at the same time the same people who were the masters of the revealed aspects of Judaism. It wasn't that you had one group of scholars who would be experts in Jewish law, what would be the equivalent of, say, Sharia in Islam or canonical law in Christianity, and then a different group of scholars who would be experts in mysticism and in meditation and in divination and all kinds of things. It was the very same people in every generation who were the heads of both of those fields. So the greatest halachic, the greatest legal thinkers in Judaism, are also the greatest Kabbalists throughout Jewish history. And this is not an exception from the rule. This is the rule in Jewish history, which is, and what happens as a result is that these incredible Jewish mystics find a way of threading their Jewish legal side with the Jewish mystical side, where they become, to the point where they become inseparable. And the reason I'm giving you this whole long build-up is because in the Hebrew word halacha, which is the word for Jewish law, actually means, the literal translation is the path, the way, the Tao. So what happens is the very legal, the minutia, and to talk about the minutia of Jewish law is an understatement. Jewish law tells you how to tie your shoelaces in the morning, how to cut your toenails, how to wipe your butt when you're finished on the bathroom, what blessings to say after you've done that, what the first thing you say in the morning, the last thing you say at night, the first thing you say when a child's born, the last thing you say when you die. There's not a moment in a Jewish life which is not governed very particularly and minutely by Jewish law, by halacha. And one could see that as antithesis to spirituality, because spirituality, people see it as something which is free-flowing and inspired and, just the woo way and going with the flow. And what happens in Judaism is that in sort of the insane minutia of Jewish law, that itself becomes the way, that becomes the Tao to God, to the infinite, which is a very, very bizarre thing. And until someone actually experiences it themselves, it's very baffling, because from the outside, all of these these tomes and tomes of rules, of these minute rules, seem very non-spiritual, until one practices and experiences how spirituality is very much threaded through them in a way that's entirely inseparable.
So it seems like almost like a code in a way.
Yes. Yeah. So the word code is a very good one. The typical English translation of one of the latest and most important books of Jewish law that Jews around the world follow is, in Hebrew, it's called the Shulchan Aruch, which for bizarre reasons literally means the set table. But when it's typically translated into English, it's called the Code of Jewish Law, because it's really a coda. It's really a very, very specific code that governs every aspect of one's life.
Oh, that's very interesting. And you've read all of this, and
so
your thing.
So one of the beauties and challenges of Jewish literature, being the people of the book, we're not just the people of a book, which is the Bible. We're people of many, many books, and there's been so much Jewish literature that's been written in so many fields, including in the field of halacha. For someone to have read all of halacha would be a few lifetimes of a project. I grew up in a Orthodox household where halacha first is just imbibed in the atmosphere by osmosis, and then I went to yeshiva, which is a form of Orthodox education. It's the equivalent of, let's say, madrasa in Islam, or if someone goes to study to be a priest in Christianity, or in whatever tradition, where we study from 7:30 in the morning until 9:30 at night. Wow. And the bulk of it is Talmud, which is sort of an earlier manifestation of halacha, and then Shulchan Aruch, which is the final iteration of the Code of Jewish Law. So yeah, we could have a whole entire conversation about halakha and history of halakha. It's something which I'm very passionate about, something which I studied intensely and have taught. There were times where I just taught halakha without teaching any philosophy or Jewish mysticism. And it's an amazing halakha is an incredible system. But I can't have said to have read all of halakha. I definitely in comparison to the amount of halakha that there is to know. I feel very much like Isaac Newton, who said that when he contemplates the mysteries of the universe, he feels like a child sitting on the shore playing with some shiny seashells while the whole ocean lays unexplored in front of him. And Jewish wisdom, even just the revealed side of Torah, is called the ocean. That's the nickname for it, because it really is like a bottomless ocean.
Wow. So how far back do these writings go?
Yeah. So the
beginning of the world, essentially.
So the earliest writings of the Jewish canon are the biblical texts themselves. And those go back to ancient Israelite religion, this is like, we're talking 3,000-4,000 years back to like the beginning of when human civilizations begin to form, religious, it's even before there's religions, where there's still like these family tribes and sort of small tribes essentially that are being formed amongst themselves and begin to write down those writings and pass them down through the ages. What happens is we mentioned before that there's a distinction between the written and the oral part of Torah. So the written parts of Torah are written from the very beginnings of the prophets. So, the stories of Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah, these go back thousands of years. And then there's the part of Jewish law, which is not written down, which is just spoken verbally. And part of the stipulation of the system is that these things are actually not allowed to be written down. They have to be passed down as oral traditions, which is something that you have in many cultures around the world. But in many cultures, unfortunately, the people who held that wisdom just in their heads and in their hearts, they died, and they didn't have a chance to pass that on. And what happened around the turn of the millennia, while the Roman Empire was occupying Judea and Israel at the time, they began to actually headhunt, literally, those sages who had this wisdom in their heads, and they began to try and exterminate them, to try and eradicate the wisdom of Judaism, at least the what was kept orally. And one great sage, just after the turn of the millennium, began to go around and go essentially and interview these great sages, and collect their teachings and compile them, which was forbidden, right? Because these teachings were not allowed to be written down. They had to be kept verbal and oral. And he took it into his hands. It was a moment in history where he decided that sometimes you have to break the law to save the law. And that's what he does. And he goes and he writes it all down, and that becomes known as the Mishnah, which means the teaching, the repetition, and it gets codified about the year 200 CE. That's when the final touches are put, and the Mishnahs are closed. It's made up of six tractates, and around 200 CE it's closed. And then for the next 300 years, the sages debate, because the Mishnah was written very hastily and very, very tersely. The sages, both in Israel and now in Babylon, where they'd been exiled, to begin to debate what this text really means. And 300 years later, the next great volume, which like quadruples, if not like 10 times in size, of the Mishnah, which is the Talmud. And essentially the rest of Jewish history is the same story repeating itself, where the subsequent generations will turn back on the previous sages' words, debate them out, argue them out, and continue to produce literature which is trying to explicate and make sense of the previous generations. And then what happens is there's this endless living chain of wisdom that gets passed down and it gets debated and gets discussed, and that continues until today.
Wow, that's pretty nuts. Do you think that? So why do you think it was just meant to be oral? Do you think there is something that gets lost in the transmission of when you take an idea or like an energy form in the form of oral tradition, and then you translate that on paper, you think they saw that that could be corrupted in a way? Like if,
Yeah, yeah.
because I
Yes,
kind of see as communication between, let's say, me and you or just another person, like speaking is a different form of communication more than just words. Like there's some kind of transmission that's going on behind the scenes when I speak to somebody and I, you know, speak from the heart, and like there's a certain kind of energy and authenticity there. And maybe they saw that, and they saw that there was something that was going to be lost when I take this oral tradition and I put it on paper.
Yeah.
I think it has something
Yeah.
to do with that.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head. I think that's what it comes down to, because information is not just about bits. It's not just about ones and zeros. It's not just about words, and it doesn't matter how they're given over. The way that message is given over sometimes is more than the message itself. You know, there's there was a Canadian media theorist who's become quite popular, Marshall McLuhan. He said the medium is the message. That very often it's not what you say, it's how it's being said. Yeah. And I think that the sages who forbade the writing down of Torah initially very much understood that there was a place for written text, and that did one thing, and there was a place for oral transmission which could not be replaced, which could not be done away with, and which could not be replicated by writing it down. And I think that's very true. And I think that when we speak, there's a giving of self that we transmit over. There's an interesting idea, just to back up a little. When God gives the Torah at Mount Sinai, the very first word that he tells the people of Israel is Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am the Lord your God that took you out of Egypt, and et cetera, and then goes on to list the 10 commandments. The Kabbalists take that first Hebrew word, Anochi, and they say it's actually an acronym, another code, another secret here. An acronym for Ana Nafshi Ksavot Yahavot. I myself have written my soul into them, which is God saying that in these words of Torah, I have inscribed, I've transcribed, I've written down my very soul. So if you take these words and you delve into them and you live with them, you will be able to encounter the soul of God, is what the Kabbalists say. But that is a task which is Herculean, that only a God can do, to put soul into text, or only some of the greatest poets in history were able to put their entire being into their words. For most humans, we still have that capacity, but we have that capacity in speech, that when we're talking, we can put ourselves into our words. And it's definitely for that reason why that was held off. But I think part of the genius of Judah the Prince, who was the man who wrote down the Mishnah, is that he was able to maintain a verbal aspect in the text for a few reasons. Firstly, because the text is not a finished text. The text doesn't give you conclusions. The text only gives you opinions. It's very Jewish. It's like the first Mishnah is that these rabbis say that you can pray the Shema until this hour, and these ones say no, only until this hour, and these ones say when they said this hour, they meant in the case one was like this one. That one said no. When those guys said this one, they really meant, and that's so the text is really, it looks like written text, but it's really verbal, and when it's spoken out loud, it comes alive itself. So that's one element, and the other element is that it's intentionally both. It has no conclusion, it has no bottom line, and it's inconclusive itself in that it's missing, and then it's empty, and then it has little gaps, like in speech. And what that demands is that later generations come and fill those blanks and those voids with their own voices, with their own souls. So the text is written in a way which is the Mishnah, incidentally, by the way, is the same Hebrew letters as the word neshama, as soul, which means that if you take the text and you can spin it around and play with it and get into it, the soul comes out, and it's your own soul that you're putting into it, that you're seeing reflected back, essentially.
It seems to me it's like we're telling a story that's not yet finished. It's like
absolutely
books, like those books are just the beginning, and we're continually telling it through our own speech, through our own word. That's why they say in the beginning it was the word, right? It was God uttered, and he created the universe, and that's what we're doing. We're speaking, and we're creating this universe quite literally through this podcast. I'm creating a medium of speaking and creating something that other people in other parts of the world can see and take in that transmission. And from there, the world changes and the universe changes. And that happens not only through podcasts and through the internet and through stuff like you do and I do. It happens in every day in our life with the words that we choose to utter and the transmissions that we choose to to transmit to other people. Wow, man, that actually just blew my mind. It's like I felt like I'm in this story that's just, it's not finished yet. We're creating the story, and it seems like that's what the meaning of it is that we are God. We're not all God. We're a portion of God, and the portion of God that we are is the creative aspect through our words, right?
Yeah, man, you would totally dig Jewish mysticism, because that is like literally what you just said is textbook Jewish mysticism. And I'll just give you the jargon, but the idea you have 100%. So the Kabbalists look to the biblical narrative where God creates the world in the very first few verses of Genesis, and the medium of creation is not that God builds anything. The medium, if you look at the verses, is God speaks the world into existence, right? Vayomer Elohim Yehi Or. God said, "Let there be light." Vayehi Or, and there was light. God says, "Let the heavens be separated from the earth," and they were separated. And the Kabbalists say that there are 10. If you count them in total, there are 10 sayings, 10 utterances. And the Kabbalists say that God continues, that those words are continually being spoken by the divine, by the infinite, into existence. And those words create reality. And the Kabbalists say that the same way that God creates reality with speech, we, being not other than God, have that power with our speech to create our own realities, to create our states of being, our states of awareness and perception and relationships. And the power of speech, the creative power in speech, is such a core principle in Jewish law and in Jewish thought, that there's also the inverse, which is destructive speech, which is lashon hara, which is called evil speech, because it's words that destroy. When we speak negatively about someone else, koin halacha, you're killing that person, because you're killing who they are in the minds of other people, and that person that exists in their minds is now being killed because you've done away with them. And inversely, when you speak kindly about someone, you allow the idea of them in the minds of others to continue to proliferate positively, and you're giving birth, and there's that idea of the creative power and energy of speech is really something which runs through and through the Kabbalistic system in a way which is very interesting, because in many mystical traditions, speech is seen as the enemy sometimes, because we live in a world which is unified. Nature has no boundaries, has no borders. There's no gap between the leaf and the branch, and the branch and the trunk, and the trunk and the roots, and the roots in the earth. But with words, we say, okay, that's leaf, that's branch, and words have a divisive power. And a lot of Eastern traditions, and in Christian and various forms of mysticism, words are seen as the enemy, and in some way uniquely as well. Not to say that one's better than the other. I think there's a very strong truth in that as well. But something that's unique in Jewish mysticism is that the Kabbalists don't turn away from words. They dive into the creative energy of words, and into the positive power of words, and the power that a loving, that a kind, that a caring word can do. The power that it has to mend a broken heart, and to bring healing to the world with simply with speech, is something which the Kabbalists really get very, very, very excited about.
Yeah, I definitely have to dive into the Kabbalah. That's for sure.
Yeah, man. I'm going to send you some cool essays that explain kind of this idea of the creative power of speech from the perspective of the Kabbalists. I think you'll dig it.
Yeah, definitely. Is there different translations that is there a better translation that someone should dive into, in your opinion?
Well, so in terms of primary texts of Kabbalah, like original texts written hundreds of years ago, they're no help in any translation for a beginner, for someone that doesn't have strong grasp of what they're talking about, to get into, because the Kabbalists talking about the creative and power of speech. The Kabbalists create their own worlds. The Kabbalists have their own very sophisticated cosmology and metaphysic and chain of being, where they have 4 worlds, Atzilus, Bria, Tzir, Asira, and they have the 10 Sfirot, Keser, Chacham, Rabbeinu, Das, Chesed, Gvur, Tzir, Malchus, and unless one understands what those terms mean and what they're referring to, which takes a while, reading the primary texts are not so helpful themselves.
Mm-hmm.
There are instances when one has a really strong intuitive sense that they've developed from other mystical traditions, and they can right away see those parallels and understand what's going on, and sort of start those years of necessary introduction. But I think what I would typically recommend people to do is to begin with secondary literature, to begin with contemporary or early modern scholars who take these ideas and kind of repackage them in a more accessible language for sort of the layperson. And there's really great scholarship that's been done to try and explicate Jewish mysticism and to make it accessible, both from a sort of religious and a confessional standpoint, and from an academic and more historical, objective standpoint. Really, really great work has been done. Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely appreciate if you send me some stuff. That's awesome.
100%.
I've actually, this is just how the universe works. There's somebody that was telling me that they were going to actually gift me, because the Kabbalah at work, and they have yet to bring it in for me, but it's just a weird coincidence that like they said that to me, and then I found you, and then we're talking about this now. So it just seems
right.
like a dawning of fate.
Right. I do hate to burst your bubble. There is no one book called the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is literally just means the received wisdom of the ages, and it's something which spans centuries, with hundreds of authors and hundreds of texts and hundreds of genres and hundreds of subcategories. There's no one. There is a text which is not a Jewish text. It's a Hermetic text called the Kabbalion, I think is how it's pronounced.
Oh, I've read that actually.
Right. Okay, so if that's not what they were talking about, then yeah. So there are some very well-known texts of Kabbalah. The Zohar is perhaps the best known text of Kabbalah. Sefer Yetzirah, Sefer Abayir, these are Sefer Raziel Malach. There are some like very, very important classic texts and texts which I've discussed on the channel, and we've done classes and discussions on them. But there's no one text called Kabbalah.
Okay, well that's good to know.
Unless there are modern books that have been written by modern scholars, which are like English scholarly introductions to Kabbalah, which can be called, which may be titled Kabbalah. That may be what they were referring to.
Probably, yeah. I still have yet to receive the book, so we'll see.
Yeah, there's like contemporary scholars that people like Moshe Dell and Elliot Wolfson and Gershon Shalom, and they have amongst their titles, they probably have at least a few that are just called Kabbalah.
What is the basis of all of this, that our words have power to create?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that I think the creative energy in words is a very, very strong theme that runs throughout Kabbalah. I wouldn't say it's the starting point of Kabbalah. I think it's part of the methodology or the hermeneutics of Kabbalah. What the starting point of Kabbalah is a very good question. I think it boils down to an attempt to understand the unity of God and what that means, the unity of reality. I think if we trace it back metaphysically, that's where it comes down to. People may trace it historically to, as we said earlier, to actually allegorical and mystical interpretations of the biblical text. So the idea of the creative power of speech is something which emerges amongst the Kabbalistic thinking. And part of that is also another important theme in Kabbalah, which is related to that, is the idea of the Gematria, of the numerology of the Hebrew letters, where numbers have some sort of fundamental relationship with fundamental reality, like in Pythagoreanism and Neo-Pythagoreanism, and there's a similar play where the words we speak in Hebrew, every Hebrew word, unlike in English where we have, one set of alphabet and one set of Roman numerals, we have numbers and letters. In Hebrew, we only have letters, and those letters are the numbers. So the Aleph, the A is 1, the base, the B is 2. So when you speak, every word you speak, you're speaking also calculations and strings of numbers as well, which is also part of that creative side of language is the creative side of arithmetic, of mathematics, which is also a very rich and bizarre field for itself.
Yeah, I watched your Gematria lecture actually last night, and
oh, nice.
Yeah, I was just like, wow, this is really in depth. I watched the whole thing though, and the ending was great. like I got what you were the point you were trying to get across, which was amazing. But I could see how it's just like a rabbit hole in itself.
Oh,
like,
for sure.
Entire thing of Gematria. There was some guy, I forget his name, but he maybe he came up with that he used Gematria to find out that the genetic coding, like our DNA, like ATC and G, somehow correlates with Yahweh, like YHWH, right? Isn't that like what it is, Yahweh, something like that?
Yeah. So interesting. I'll be honest here. It's actually funny that you watched the video, and I'll tell you why. Because at the time I was teaching in an institution down in Australia where I'm from, and they were doing like a series of lectures, and they asked all of like the in-house teachers to teach something, but they didn't like have us treat the topics. They like dished out the topics to us. It was like kind of like they sprung them as a surprise on us. It's like, here, you have like 2 days to come back, and you're going to be lecturing like to the audience in that. And personally, I'm much more like enamored by words than by numbers. I'm like horrible with mathematics.
Yeah.
I'm really no good with that. Words is like I really where I thrive. So as you could see in the lecture, the first half I was true to the subject and I spoke about numbers. The second half I managed to like pivot and talk about language, right?
Yeah.
And part of the reason which I'm skeptical of numbers, and I think that came out in the class if people were listening, is because there's a certain leeway that people can play with numbers in a way that doesn't really have any checks and balances, right? Anyone like growing up, there are always people in the community who would always be finding these fantastical gematrias for whatever thing whatever they wanted to prove, they would find a way to make the numbers work. And because of the flexibility of the gematria system, there's like always another way to make it fit in. And for that reason, like I have my own like a bit of trauma maybe and a bit of skepticism towards like the whole number game. And I prefer to work like in more rigid, linguistic, metaphysical, historical spaces. But so like this idea of the DNA, it sounds like a cool idea. It sounds like something which like firstly I haven't heard of it, but which doesn't mean that it's not true. There's a lot of things I haven't heard of which are true. But I think that they're because numbers are so malleable, they're unfalsifiable, right? It's very hard to disprove anything that's done with numbers. I think if something's going to be rigorous, there has to be a way that it can also be wrong. If it can't be wrong, it can't be this, right? So that's my personal like my peeve with the number game.
So it's almost like confirmation bias in a way, like that guy was trying to make it seem like Yahweh was in our DNA.
Yeah, and I don't mean to talk trash about anyone that's like into doing the numbers and into numerology. Like I totally respect whatever talks to people. Just personally, that's not what talks to me. And just to be clear, like, I'm not here to like to discredit it or to call the bluff of it. Like it's just not my thing. It might be someone else's thing, and that's good for them. If that fundamentally, like as well, I think there's a pragmatic side, which is like, where do these things lead us, right? Do these things take us closer to God, i.e. to being loving, compassionate, kind, living in unity with ourselves and those around us? If whatever you're doing takes you in that direction, then keep doing it, right? You could be like counting the bricks in the wall and it turns you into a more kind and compassionate person because it's slowed you down and it's made you more softer to reality, and you're whatever it is, like, then keep counting bricks. But if you're doing like even the holiest thing, like you're fasting and you're studying and you're doing this and you're praying, but you end up like being a dick to people, then reconsider whatever you're doing. Like it's very much so if people are like getting deep into numbers and it's making them better people and kinder people, keep doing it. If it's making them like nervous and suspicious and conspiratorial and paranoid, then stop.
Yep. And I think that's it, man. You just said it. It's that it doesn't matter what kind of rituals you do. It's how you act as a person. Like you could never go to church. You could never read a religious text in your life. You could not even know how to read. But as long as you treat people well and you have like the sense of creating a better world and creating a better, yourself, just love, essentially, just being a good person, then that's the most religious and godly thing that you can do. Like, it doesn't matter if you whip yourself at night or like how many religious books that you've read or you meditate or do yoga. Like, all of those things are just rituals to hopefully for a lot of people bring us closer to God. But if it doesn't, then you're missing the point. Like you're not, which is a lot of people are missing the point in our world right now because it doesn't matter, man. Like, summing this whole conversation up, it's just that we're all one. If whatever you have to do, whatever you have to read, whatever you have to go through and put yourself through to bring yourself closer to God, closer to the divine force that we live by, then that's what you have to do, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, I mean, this message of like what we've been saying here is the oldest message. Like if you read, when I was younger, I was very into the biblical prophets. If you read like the prophet Isaiah, he's told like the entire book, basically, he's telling off the people. He's like, you guys are doing all this religious practice, but you're not being kinder and better, and you're not being more holy and like tender. Like he's like, you guys fast, but you pass by the guy in the street who's dying from hunger. Instead of fasting, make a meal and invite him in to eat with you. Like God doesn't need your fast. God does, like he needs you to be kind to the downtrodden. And yeah, there's also there's this really great Sufi metaphor of this scholar who like knows so much wisdom, right? And he's studying and studying and studying to get closer to God. And another Sufi master was like a very simple guy, and like truth to him was very simple. He said, he was like very straight with him. He's like, bro, you're like a donkey, which is climbing up the mountain, but you're not getting anywhere because you have a saddle filled with books. He said, get rid of your books and you climb the mountain. Which is not to say that sometimes the books for someone else, it may be the case that the books, you know, they're putting one on top of the other and they're climbing on top of them and they're getting somewhere and they're not being held down by them. But for sure, the idea of like hanging on to what's really real about the journey and about the search is so hard, but so necessary. And there's something really bizarre and fascinating and disturbing in the human mechanism where we so easily lose sight of the real objective, and get caught up in trappings and externalities. And but I fully agree with you. That message is so true.
Is that what God is to you? Living in accordance to God's law is just kind of being selfless and just seeing others as yourself? Is that, put it simply, is that what it is to you?
Yeah. So I think the notion of a separate self, the notion of the ego, which means that there's me, which is different, which is independent and other, and disconnected from the things around me. I think that is like the fundamental illusion. And what that says is, it says that it denies the unity and infinity of the divine. Because if I really believe in a divine unity, which is infinite, then there is no way that I can be separate from that, or from you, or from the stranger. So I do think that God is the term that we use to describe this infinite, unified reality. And it's specific, it's precisely our perception of me being something other than that, something separate than that holds me back from experiencing that. And that creates all kinds of really crazy situations, like things like fear and anger and anxiety and guilt and jealousy. Like those all emerge from that lie of a separate self, from the lie of ego. And getting in touch with the divine means allowing that to die. That's like the necessity to kill the ego is like the oldest myth in all of human history, right? To slay the dragon. To in Islam we call it fana, when you allow the self to be annihilated. In Kabbalah we call it bitul. In Christianity it's called crucifixion, or whatever the term. In where we allow the self to be extinguished in Buddhism, nirvana, and then we can just experience reality as it is without that illusion. And that's the experience of the divine. And I think that experience is not one which is foreign to us. I think in moments of love and ecstasy and rapture and aesthetic, you know, beauty, we lose ourselves, right? That's the term we use, and the reason we use that term is because we literally lose that sense of self, which is other than whatever we're engaging with, and we become one with that thing. And the bliss in those moments, the bliss in love, the bliss in music, the bliss in dance, the bliss in war, in sports, in all different where the self is lost, in sex, in psychedelics, is when we let go of that illusion and allow ourselves to be immersed in the totality of reality, and that reality is fundamentally blissful. And that's the core teaching, right? It's and I think that's a treat. I think these teachings are so ubiquitous. I mean, you could literally say that same paragraph. You could translate that with entirely into Muslim words, entirely into Jewish words, entirely into Hindu words, entirely into and with the same exact message is just so, and it's so real. It's so evident.
Yeah, like our true being, our true essence, is just peace. It actually is intrinsically the true essence of the universe is just this kind, loving peace. And yeah, it's something that we've lost. But I think it's almost like we need to. It's like, you know, getting back to what we talked about. It's like we needed to, because God got a little bored. We need this separation, because if we always knew that we were all the same thing all the time, then there wouldn't be the phenomena of love. Because in order for me to love you or somebody else, you need to be, I need to see you as a separate self first. And then through my love, I see you as like a unified self. You know what I mean by that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think there's a truth to that, and that links back to what we started by saying, that there is a necessity, like the illusion of otherness, which is what is created at the beginning of time, according to mysticism. In Jewish mysticism, it's what created through the act of tzimtzum, when God, so to speak, contracts God's self to create space for the illusion of other, is something which is done on design, intentionally.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting. You know, there's I don't know if this will be entirely relevant, but there's a Jewish philosopher, 20th century Jewish philosopher, who I was very into, Martin Buber. He wrote a book called Ein Thou, which most Jews haven't heard of, but it became a popular book in Christian circles, where he spoke about the two different forms of relationships that we construct in our lives. One is the I-it, where we make the other thing an object, a means to an ends, some sort of tool that we can use, and we can do that with literal objects, or we can do it with people. A person can be an I-it, right? Mm-hmm. If I only came to this interview because I thought I could get something out of it, then I'm turning you into an object, into an it. But if I come to encounter you, to experience you, to hear from you, to be with you, then you're not an it, you're a you. It's an I thou. And Buber says that God is the thing which is eternally thou. God can never be made a means to an end, which means that the true essence of reality is something which is entirely an end in itself, right? There's no point where reality doesn't satisfy its own end purpose, which means that the love that's present in every moment of reality is discoverable and is experienceable. The reason why sorry, I'm getting distracted. The reason why I brought Buber up here. Good. The reason why I brought him up is because Buber begins his thinking in more of a unitive, monistic, mystical thinking. He wrote his PhD on Nicholas of Cusa, and then he ends up moving more into this, what's known as like his later thinking, which is dialogical, where the encounter of divinity is between the self and the other, between the I and the you. Whereas before he was more like, it's all just the I, right? Kind of like the Hindu idea of like, it's the satvamasi, like it's like that, like whatever you encounter is all just the you. And Buber was like, no, there needs to be real space for that to be love. And it's a hard one. It's a hard one because I'm so connected to the idea of like oneness and unity, and I want to like respond to him and say like, no, I can love myself and I can love you in the same way that I love myself. I don't need to be other from myself to love me, and I don't need to be other from you to love you, and I don't need to be other from anything else to love it. So part of me is like pushing in the direction of like I think sometimes when we find, I don't know, I don't think anyone in this conversation or in these circles is doing it, but sometimes like we put up a facade of the necessity of otherness to then justify our own ego. Where if we could embrace love in a way that did not need otherness, then that excuse would be just mitigated.
Oh, it transcends like the whole ego, the separation, unity aspect. It just like, I see what you're saying. If you just recognize that true love, it just goes beyond that needed separation in order to have love. That's pretty powerful, man.
Yeah, and I think there's something experiential about that. Like I think like a lot of the talk that we're having now is like people might think it's like very high and lofty and very like beyond and very like, but it's the point. It is, but the most incredible thing I think about mysticism as well for like our contemporary age, which is so scientific and empirical, is that these ideas are actually empirical and experienceable. Like it does not take that much. Mm-hmm. Either meditatively or relationally or chemically to literally experience things that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And that really blows my mind. The how close these ideas are and how actually experientiable and empirical they are is something which I think the world is still struggling to come to terms with. Yeah. Because these ideas are devastating ideas. They're ideas which destroy the world as we currently know it, right? The world operates on the antithesis of what we're talking about. And the power and the nearness of these ideas, I think, is terrifying to a lot of the sort of the old world structure, which necessitates otherness and distinction and ego and competition, and it's very clear that that order is not working. That order is
Yes.
destroying us, destroying the planet, destroying, like, it's like running itself straight into a hole. And the alternative is I think something which we are trying to express and to talk about and to create with our words. And I think it's there. I think it's not up there. I think it's so reachable.
Yeah, it's like hidden in plain sight. Like we
literally,
it's inside of all of us. Just as something, and I think it's just our conditioning that's kind of blocking it. Or I don't know. Maybe just some people are more destined to find it, and others aren't in this incarnation. Yeah.
But you see, I mean, you must see this in your life. You must see like moments where you yourself, I would love to know about like how this happened for you, but moments where that became very clear for you that was the truth, and moments in like the people around you in their lives where they switched paradigms. And I don't mean to say that like the second you come to that realization, you become like a saint overnight. Like we slip back into our old ways and into ways of being that are selfish and that are egoic for sure. But there's definitely a very definitive transition where it's like, oh, this is the challenge is now whether I can live up to it. But it becomes very clear to us that this is the reality that needs to be, aimed for.
Yes, it's like because every day is a new day. So like then you have new problems and new drama every day that gets us
for sure
lost in the sauce, I like to say. But once you open that door, you know what it's like on the other side of that door, and it never really closes. And for me, it was I meditate every day. I do yoga. I smoke a lot of weed, and I think it was probably because I took a large dose of psilocybin mushrooms. There was this one time I took a large dose, and it led me to some kind of, I guess you can say like Christ consciousness. You know what I mean? It was just like this pouring out of I just felt everybody suffering, and I felt connected to everybody on earth. And I was like, oh my God, like I am them, they are me. I started crying like endlessly, like I've never cried before. I'm just in my bed, literally just in my bed, just like having an amazing, one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. And I came to like these crazy conclusions about like what it means to be a human, the human condition. And then I was like, whoa, I mean, I guess this just means since everybody's suffering, I just have to love everybody. But then I was like, I can't just love. What am I going to do? I'm just a dude. And then I came down, and then I realized like, well, I just have to live the best way that I can in accordance to how I felt in that moment. And it's just not even just from that one time doing mushrooms. It was also from like, I'm a very, I have a dedicated meditation practice. And like I said, I'm huge into yoga. So that definitely aided that and keeps me aligned with that mission. But I opened the door. I don't know if it was on that night. There was plenty of other times of high doses of cannabis that allowed me to see that light as well. But it's just like I opened that door and I can't close it. Like no matter how much, it's almost like the term ignorance is bliss is a thing. It's kind of is. It's like no matter what, I can't go back to the separation. Like I always know that when I look in somebody else's eyes, no matter how much of an asshole they might be or might be treating me, like I know that they're just going through something. They're just lost. They're not any separate from how I am. Like there's nothing that's going to tell me otherwise that I'm separate from you or any other people. Like you can't, like there's just something that's over me and inside of me now that I just can't lose.
Yeah, that's really epic. I thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you some questions. You mind if we turn the tables here a little?
Yeah, go for it, Ben. Yeah.
So I love that. I think that description is so spot on. And I think that idea of embodying the Christ consciousness is so accurate. And I think that if you go back to like original, Christian texts, like the message of Jesus is that everyone has that capacity to be the Christ, to be the Messiah. The kingdom of heaven is within each of us, right? Yep. And the Buddhist idea that each one of us, the Mahayana idea that each one of us like is capable of being the bodhisattva. Yep. Like it's not just the one Buddha, like we all are. And so that idea I think is through religions, and I think that realization that we're not waiting for some divine redeemer to come down on the clouds. Like we are the messiahs, and I think that's the most epic realization. I think that's what the world needs to start realizing. But what's very fascinating is, and getting to that experience through psychedelics is so epic and happening a lot today, which is incredible. And I think it's beautiful. But there's something very interesting is that along with your psychedelic experience, you also had some very rigorous practice, meditation, yoga, which is like mind control, getting in touch with your body, and those kind of things. And I'm really curious to know, because I have tons of friends who I myself have not, but tons of my friends who like have done doing psychedelics. And it doesn't always like make them better people. Talking about like that litmus test of like, does this make you a kinder, better, more godly, more Christ-like person? And my sense is, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this from the inside, my sense is it's that there's something about the work that needs to be put in to get there. It's not just having the experience is not enough. There also needs to be the training. There needs to be the effort. There needs to be there's an old Jewish expression that if someone says they like got the gold without putting in any effort, it's not true gold. Lo yogati matzati altam. If someone says that I didn't put in the effort and I succeeded, they're not to be believed. So I'm curious to know where like what that means to you. Like, did you feel like you were preparing yourself for an experience? Did you have an experience and then try to find ways to harness it? Have you seen other of your friends who have been more successful, less successful in sort of harnessing those divine experiences?
Yeah, I've come to that conclusion as well, because I've talked to many people that have had these experiences, and it doesn't seem to touch them as it touched me. And I think it's something like, I think Terence McKenna said it, that psychedelics don't work on stupid people, but it's not necessarily stupid people. I think it was just a bad way to say it. I think it's just that psychedelics don't really work in how they, I don't know if you want to say should work, but how they can work on others, on most people, because I think there is like something you have to, so I started meditating and yoga regularly before I got into mushrooms. And it was almost like my unconscious was training me for that experience, because meditation to me was something special, and I knew I was reaching upon something deeper than I could ever imagine. And so was yoga, like with the whole idea of cleansing chakras. And it was ultimately just making me feel good and making me a calmer person, just altogether. And I don't know what it did, physiologically, what it really did to me. But I think it did, in a way, prepare me to be able to handle psilocybin, because I see psychedelics as a tool. And if you don't use the tool correctly, nothing's going to happen. Just like a hammer. Like, you could build a house with a hammer and a few other tools, but if you don't know how to build the house, then you're just going to have the tool, and you're not going to you can destroy things too with the hammer. And it's the same thing with psychedelics as well. So I think you almost need like a training regimen to know how to incorporate these and work these into your life. Because if you do, and if you can use them effectively, they can it's almost like having the limitless pill, and they can make you just see, well, first of all, microdosing, that's a whole nother story. They can give you like creative inspiration that you've never felt before. But then you can have the higher doses where you could literally feel like you are Jesus Christ himself on earth, that is also a dangerous idea to have too. So that's why you need to have that like grounding aspect of the meditation and the yoga and that whole, it's a whole process. Like I see these medicines, I see them as medicines, obviously, like the cannabis and mushrooms. I just see them as extensions of my yoga practice. Essentially, they're just yogic medicines in a way, and they have to be incorporated in the right way. Like psychedelics are taking off like crazy like now, and so is cannabis. But the people aren't using them. I mean, people can use them for however they want to use them. Like, I'm not going to say anything, I'm not going to tell anybody how they can use it. But if to a certain person, it can change the world, because who was it that there was somebody, the guy that came up with like the DNA structure, he found he was on LSD when he came up with the inspiration for the double helix. I don't remember the guy's name, but there's plenty of other examples where these great minds just needed that quick, like there was something like there was just a catalyst to change, because they already had the basis of being that, like having that mindset, but they just needed something to show them like a different light, like to open that door, like I said. And then from there, they act accordingly from how they learned. But most people just don't even have that basis in the beginning.
Yeah.
What about you? What's your experience? Have you experienced any of that?
I've not experienced anything chemically. I've kind of been like intentionally, voluntarily holding off from that experience.
I don't think you
Maybe,
need to, honestly, to be honest, man. Like you seem to already, because you already seem to have that sense. Like if what had to bring me to that sense was these chemicals and showed me a different light. But if we can have this conversation with each other, then you might get something out of it. You'll probably feel amazing and have these crazy feelings and just feel just all this love. But getting something out of it, I don't know. Like, and you're already acting according to the way. Like, from what the messages that you're trying to spread, to me, it seems like I'm not discouraging you from doing it. I think everybody should experience what a psychedelic experience is at least once in their lifetime, especially if you're like a sane individual. But to me, it seems like you already are on that path, So
yeah,
I wouldn't rush into it if I were you either. Like just whenever it's right for you.
that's really interesting. I really appreciate that perspective. Like most of my friends who've like done psychedelics, they become like totally like, evangelical about it. And they're like all trying to get me to do it all the time. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate like that take.
Are your friends though, are they, sorry to interrupt, are they like living in according to the way, or are they just lost in like, you got to like see the colors, man, and
right,
emotions. Like, dude, but like, dude, my opinion on these things is it's what you do with them, what you get from them to act from them.
Yeah. I actually wanted to ask you something. There's like, mm-hmm. I want to know, like in sort of the more psychedelic world, which I'm sure as well, like has a huge online, community and presence as well as everything does today. Are there people who are like standing up as like thought leaders who are like trying to take it from just being like a party tripped out, ecstatic experience to be something meaningful and mystical? Are there people who are trying to like tell people, hey guys, put in the work, find like the dharma, find the duty that it demands? Like, is that a conversation which is happening?
That's the people I'm trying to find, to be honest with you. I've had a few people that there was one other guy, his name's Adeptus Psychonautica, that I've had on a few episodes ago, and he recognizes that. We had a whole over hour-long conversation about that. It's not really about it's not really about getting high. It's about what you do with getting high, essentially.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I don't think there is a vast majority of popularity coming to these things, but there's not, that I've found, a lot of thought leaders, like you said, that are expressing that. I mean, it really comes down to, there's not really leaders. It's just people sharing their anecdotal accounts of how they've really, you ever heard of trip reports? Like people go through that. That's the big thing about it. But I don't think there's really not a lot of people I never really thought of that. There's not a lot of people that are speaking on how useful these things can be creative
and how to harness them. Right. Can I recommend a guest for you definitely to reach out and have on? Mm-hmm. There's this guy, Bill Richards, William Richards. He wrote a book called Sacred Knowledge. Mm-hmm. And he was like one of the main actual scientists. He's one of the scientists that when psychedelics were allowed to be studied again, I think it was Stanford, started experimenting again. Him and I forget the other guy's name, were like the lead scientists on the case. And this guy is super like understands this point and is super like about it, and about like taking these things from just like party experiences and actually making them something which is really like meaningful and therapeutic and healing for the world and loving. There's an incredible, his book is fantastic. He also gave an incredible lecture and Q&A, which is on YouTube. I'll send you a link. And he seems like the type of guy that if you dropped him an email, he would come on. And I think it's conversations like that and voices like that. Where I see my work is more from two different angles. It's less in, I engage with the psychedelic community only by proxy because we're talking about related things, but I don't really address psychedelics directly because I don't have experience and I'm not a scientist either. But I think that psychedelics is one avenue, and I think that there are other avenues. One of them is religion, which has been like the typical, home of mysticism throughout the ages, and the other is philosophy. I think that mysticism and philosophy have a rich relationship. So I'm trying to kind of attack it from those two sides and bring people through those doors. But I think he might be a really great guest to talk about how we can begin to bring people in through the chemical door.
Yeah, definitely. And not everybody is capable of honestly coming through that. It's just, you have to have that mindset. But there are people out there that if they know how to use these as tools, they can we can create a better world than we can ever imagine. And I highly encourage you, man, to, no rush on it, but you definitely want to experience it before you die, because it's just like, it's a feeling and an experience that you cannot put words on. I see them as like religious sacraments in a way. Like, I think
For sure.
sometimes they were used in old style rituals where they were given these things and people were having these visions of God. But I don't think your message is really going to change too much if you did do it. I mean, you're already on the God and unity and loving path. I just think it's just something that your consciousness probably might want to experience in this incarnation, right. Man. I think it would. I think you would definitely enjoy it, and don't be scared. It's definitely nothing to be scared of, because you, like, if you're already in touch with that vibe, it's only gonna create a better experience for you. If you know what I mean, like, there's nothing for you to resist, because a lot of people have negative experiences on these psychedelics because they resist whatever's coming up, and they just can't handle it. But I mean, if you're already on that vibe, like, it's just gonna be like this amazing 4 to 6 hour experience that, who knows, it may change your life, it might not, but either way, it's just something that I think you should experience.
Yeah, I think when the time is right, like, it will make itself happen in my life.
Yeah.
What I'm kind of thinking about and concerned with is about really I see mysticism divided into 3 categories. If we're going to try and make sense of it, there's like experience, which is where these things fall under. Then there's theory, which is like theology, metaphysics, history, mythology, like all of that. And then there's the practice, which is both the ritual practice, which like facilitates the experience, and there's the ethical practice about like, how do we live our lives knowing all that. And I think that there's a direct continuity between all those 3, right? So experience leads to theory, which leads to practice, which leads back to experience. It's a loop which continues. And part of my concern with some like proponents of the psychedelic world is that it ends either in when any of these 3 fields become isolated, when they become like disintegrated from the rest of the 3. If people are just having experiences and it's not leading them to think differently or to act differently, or if people are just thinking, philosophically, but they're not doing differently, then, or people are just like doing practice, but it's not leading them to any kind of real grounded ideas or experiences, then that's a problem. And so I think there's something, I'm definitely not opposed to the experience. And I'm definitely going to go for it one day, God willing, when the time is right. But there's something, like something indulgent about it, right? There's something like maybe a bit hedonistic about it, which I'm not against hedonism. Like I think pleasure is great. I think people should enjoy themselves. But my primary concern is like, how do we bring the world to a better, more loving kind of place? And what are the ideas that need to be articulated and presented and argued forth, so that we can start living in accordance with those things? So that's just maybe where like my focus is a bit different than the experiential side.
So are you concerned to just get lost in the experience?
I'm not so much concerned about like losing my mind or getting lost or like or having like an endless, like an infinite trip. I think that there's a possibility where there's like a deep, I mean, I've read like hundreds of accounts of the experience. I think there's a sense where there's like a deep bliss and ecstasy, and there may be, because the world is like, seems at times so dark and so broken and so hurting, that we may just want to escape into our personal private experiences of bliss. And there's something about the messianic calling, the bodhisattva, or in Jewish mysticism, there's the idea of the Tzodreiselt Messiah, the Messiah who's crushed, who's someone who knows how good things could be, how beautiful life could be, but is fully present in a world where it's not like that. And I think if people just, I think there is a possibility of an escapism if we escape into our own private nirvanas, right? So the bodhisattva takes a vow not to cross the river into nirvana until everyone is ready to cross the river with him, right? And I think that there is perhaps a danger if like the community that's about enlightenment and about like evolving consciousness and bringing messianic paradigms to the world just escapes themselves into that messianic reality, they'll be there and they'll live like happy, loving lives on their own, you know, hippie communes and Burning Mans, but the rest of the world is going to be stuck in old paradigms. And I think there's maybe a need to leave paradise and to go and try and help others find a way there. I don't know. Like this is so this is just like thinking off the cuff. I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I definitely 100% know what you mean. I don't think you have to be concerned about that, though. I think it would only make your work even more substantial, or it might not even have any effect on you, to be honest. But because you, like I said, you already are on that vibe. It's not going to take away from anything, though. It's not like you're going to become a hippie if you decided to do mushrooms for the first time. It really wouldn't. It would just. And the thing about that too is like a lot of people put up their experiences, but it's only going to be your own experience. Like you can read thousands of accounts of how people felt on it, but at the end of the day, words only go so far and how it is. And it's just a felt experience. It's just something 100%. That you really like, as much as we're talking about it right now, there's nothing that can make you feel like this is how I felt, right? I felt that moment that I had on mushrooms was my entire life was leading up to that. So I could experience what that was, almost like a catalyst. And then it was like an awakening. Like I changed my life down a different direction. Very peculiar. Very, very peculiar. But like I said, not everybody needs it, man. Do it when the time's right. Because if the vibe is not right, if the energy isn't right and how you feel and what you're taking, it's not going to be an experience. So just whenever there's just like this certain yearning that you may feel, that I feel at least, that when I need to do this, and it's kind of like an aspect of change. When I feel that I need the change in my being, like I need some kind of, like I said, catalyst, because that's kind of how I see them as. If I need some kind of like I need to see something differently, or I need to align myself differently, I don't even trip anymore, actually. I don't even take mass amounts. I think it's not something that you need to do all the time. And if you're doing it all the time, then you're obviously looking for something that you're not going to find in mushrooms. Like, I think it's just, you do it once or twice. And if you need to do it more, I guess, I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to explain because everybody's different, man. Everybody is different. But for me, I only needed to do it probably once, twice, 3 times. And then I got the message and I hung up the phone.
Yeah.
Now I just kind of microdose, which if you know anything about microdosing, it doesn't affect really, like you're still in this world. It's like almost like having a cup of coffee, like a philosophical cup of coffee in a way. It's kind of like just like a pick me up. It's not going to affect your thought process. You're not going to start seeing portals to another dimension. It just kind of helps with creativity. It's that's what I would actually recommend to you. If you want to just like dip your toes into what these substances are, just take like a little bit, whatever substance is. I don't know. I stick to organic stuff, anything that's from the planet of the earth. I think that's how it was meant to be.
Nice.
But yeah, just take like a little bit, and then you'll start to feel how it feels, and you'll be like, oh wait, this isn't as big of a deal as people think. And then you can always up the dose. You can't take anything.
Modulate it.
Yeah.
Right. I'm curious to know, besides for like your own personal life and practice, I'm not really that much aware of your project. I'm really curious to know about this with people. Like now that you've come to these like discoveries and ways of living, I would love if you would like give me your elevator pitch of how you're trying to like manifest those things and bring these things out. To like, what's your project all about?
Actually, I had somebody ask me this the other night too, and she's actually she's a Buddhist nun that's been a nun. She's been living in a monastery for 11 years, so she's going to be on the project in a few weeks. But it was an answer that I had to really think about because no one's really asked me that. So let me try internalize it real quick. I see my work as connecting, similar to yours, man. It's like connecting all of these different belief systems from all over the world, from all different walks of life, men, women, whatever. We're all human beings. So whatever we look like or where we're from or how we sound, I see my job as connecting all of these people to create one story, to show people that no matter how differently we live our lives, we're all encompassing this perspective that I call the conscious perspective. And no matter how you reach that, no matter how you reach that perspective, that's up to you. But I can recognize when somebody has that perspective. It doesn't matter what words they use to describe it. It's like, it's the thing that they're describing. It's that love and unity that we talk about. And if you can speak about that and have that message and that energy and that transmission, I want to bring you on to the show and have a conversation with you so you can elaborate more on that idea. And then if people follow me, which there are some people out there, I'm not enormously famous yet, but if you follow me, you'll see that I have just different walks of life, but we're all touching upon the same concept. And I just want to bring to light that concept of we're all human beings. We're all one, man. You know, like, I don't want to go too hippie-ish on this, but that's what I'm trying to show. I don't want to just interview people that have done mushrooms. That's it. And just psychedelics. Like, no, there's more to it than that. I want to interview people like you, who's a rabbi in Israel, that I never could think that I could speak of. If it wasn't 2020, if this was like 20, 30 years ago, like, we would never be having this conversation. Yeah. So I'm taking advantage of the technology that I have in my life, the skills that I have gathered in my life, and my I guess you could say my philosophy on life, in trying to create this project to just ultimately show people that we're all the same. And it's through just everybody's own story. Like, I've had an interest with religion my whole life, like just different philosophies, but I've never been into like so much in one, really. Like, I've just had different practices and I see the truth in all of them. Like, that's been my whole life ever since, like, I was like, I can remember that I could be on the internet. I'd be just looking up all of the religions and seeing how they relate. So this is just an extension of that, is just speaking to people like you that have read more than I could probably ever imagine, and that are really, really intense into this, this one facet of living, this one way of living, even though you're not. I'm just saying that, like, you have a lot more knowledge in one aspect than most people would. And speaking to people like you and showing that it doesn't matter. We're all pointing in the same direction. It's all the human experience. And from there, I don't know what happens with the world. I'm just trying to create that unity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I really get what you're saying. And I think two things that you said really resonated with me. One is that we find like our own like personal talents and capabilities and strengths, and find ways to put those in service of love and unity and humanity. Mm-hmm. And also the technologies that we're given, right? We're privileged to live in a day and age where we have electricity, we have internet, we have computers, we have all these things, we have microphones. And instead of taking those things and using them as tools of, just simply self-fulfilling pleasure and selfish ends, and instead of taking those as means to try and create a more loving reality, I think those are two really cool ideas. And I think that the fact that you're doing it via conversation is really cool as well, because I think that conversation is really like where you have a meeting of minds, and when you have a capacity to, like we're talking about the idea of like the Torah, which has to be verbal, where you have two souls that can come and really like have a harmony and what's that called in singing when people do two different notes? Harmony. That's a harmony word. Yeah, harmony, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Where you have a conversation where we can harmonize off one another, and we can also like bounce off each other's strengths and skills and move things forward and take and really elevate consciousness together. I think there's something about that.
There is. There's something psychedelic about a conversation, a simple conversation that somebody can have. Because I'm actually a huge podcast fan myself. Like, I listen to so many podcasts. And as I was listening to them, I was like, wait a second, I can just make my own. Like, who says I can't just get on my phone and do this? But I thought of I wanted to fill a niche that nobody seems to be really doing. And that's exploring spirituality, but not just spirituality in one aspect. Because there's plenty of other podcasts that explore like yogic or Judaistic philosophy, or just any, insert belief system here,
Sure.
podcast. But I was
Right.
like, well, nobody seems to be really exploring the whole, like everything, like an entire, like, and I don't just want to make it about like that too. I also want to make it fun and, you know, sometimes a little funny and just have a good time with the person and kind of lighthearted, but it's a whole thing that I'm still learning as I do it. You know, this is still a new
Nice.
project for me. I just started a few months ago, but it's been the whole basis of it is this. I realize that I am not a religious scholar. I am just some dumb. I'm not dumb. Well, I mean, I'm just some guy that lives in America that is just curious about things. And I like to read and I like to talk to people. So I'm like, well, if I'm going to do that, and have these conversations that I genuinely want to have with you and all these other people, I might as well film it. And then as I'm learning and as I gather this knowledge for myself, other people can follow me along.
That's super
and that's
cool.
really that's the basis of it. Because I was, I'm in yoga training right now, which I actually have to go to in a few minutes. So we have to wrap this up. Sorry, man.
No problem.
So quick story is, I was in yoga training, which was over Zoom with one of my teachers he's complete 100% yogi. And I know, and it was just like this, it was like a classroom aspect and there was other people in there, but I noticed I was asking him more questions than most people because I was just genuinely curious. And that's when it dawned on me. I was like, wait a second, I can just do this. Like, I don't need to be in this, like this rigid program of studying yoga. Like I can literally just make my own program and let my own curiosity lead the way. So that's what I'm doing. Because I don't know, I'm ignorant. Like I'll admit that I'm just some ignorant white guy. Like I don't really know much. So I'm using that and using my own, I don't know if you want to say folly. It's not really a folly. It's just how I am. Like using my own just yearning for knowledge to lead the way in this project. And so far it's been a lot, greater than I could have ever imagined. And that's thanks to people like you coming on here, man. I really appreciate that. This amazing conversation that we had.
Total pleasure, man.
Yeah, this was awesome.
I feel the same way. I feel the same way. I feel like I do like myself is more like presentation. I'm like pretending to like know things, but I really know nothing. Like I know nothing. And the very fact that I'm opening my mouth to like to say anything is total folly. It's like total stupidity. But there's a certain like you just embrace that. You just like get into like you just dive into the character and you go and you ride with it. And people appreciate it. I'm sure you like you've seen how much people dig what you're putting out and how much goodness and how much just like kindness and yeah, it's like I really encourage more people to get up and take these conversations and make them live. You know, all we hear on the news is like bad things. Instead, like have people just get up and do kind things, and everyone can do it. People can do it through art and music and poetry and building, and like there's a million ways that like neither of like I can't do any of those things, and there are things you can do that like I like everyone has their own skills, and just finding a way to take our own skills and really catalyzing them to like to turn them into weapons of love and peace. Is wild.
Yep. Honestly, man, couldn't have said it better myself. And that's how we create a better world. It's just the little things that we do that whatever we're good at, and those little things they all add up to create the bigger and better world that hopefully we're moving toward.
Yeah, I feel it, bro.
And I feel it too. So with that, thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure.
Zevi Slavin? Is that how you say your name?
Yeah. Slavin, you got it.
Zevi Slavin, thank you so very much for coming on this. I would love to do this again. You're a cool guy. I like your vibe, man.
Thanks, man. Same. Yeah, hit me up. I'll be happy to. Sounds
good, man. Yeah, and send me. You said you were gonna like send me some text, so like whatever you wanna send over. That
yeah. I'm gonna send you some Jewish stuff. I'm gonna send you that the guide, The Sacred Knowledge. Awesome. And yeah, and if anytime in the future, if you have any like specific questions or any specific things you want to talk about, or just in general, just to kick back, I'm happy to hang.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it, man. Keep fighting the good fight. I gotta get going though, like I said. So,
a pleasure.
Peace out.
Much love.